All right, that is hit. All right, guys. So welcome to Long Island Blockchain. We are super excited about today's meetup. It's kind of been a bit of a long time in the coming. We've been talking about doing a talk on NFTs for a few months now. Some of you guys may already know us. Some of you guys may be new here. I think a lot of you guys are new here, so we may repeat ourselves in terms of introducing ourselves. But we have a really exciting talk prepared for you guys today covering NFTs. And really the goal of this presentation and talk is going to be around really understanding what NFTs are fundamentally in terms of the technology itself, and then discussing some of the kind of more social aspects of what they're enabling us to actually do in the marketplace, and kind of what it's empowering, what the technology is that it's empowering us to achieve, and maybe why or why not you'd want to put your own hard-earned money into it, and where the value is actually derived from. So the format of this talk is I have a few slides. It's not going to be this like very slide heavy thing, but there's a few slides that we put together, but they're mostly there to just kind of guide the conversation. And I encourage you guys to, dive in with any questions, and just really kind of hopefully have a conversation around the different aspects of NFTs. We're going to start off a little slow with like what the fundamentals are with smart contracts. We may get a little technical later on. We could get more technical if you guys are interested, or we can get less technical. We'll kind of gauge it a bit. These Zoom meetups are a little hard to gauge it. I typically like to do these types of presentations in person because I can kind of feel the room and see where we're all coming from. With this many people on the call, we're probably not going to do individual introductions. So, if you want, just dive in and ask any questions. So without further ado, why don't we actually get started here? So a little bit about us. We are Long Island Blockchain. Craig and I started Long Island Blockchain about, 2 years ago now, Craig?
4, Nick. We're old.
4 years ago? Jeez. Okay. Time is going too fast. All right. 4 years ago. We started out at a local incubator here on Long Island, and we were hosting events there for a couple of years. And now, since COVID happened, we've started to kind of do more stuff online. We kind of took a year hiatus in 2020 because of all the craziness and things. But, we're kind of starting 2021 strong with a couple of these meetups and trying to just bring it online. So our goal is really to just educate the community around cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and at the same time, learn about them with you. I mean, there's so much to learn, and we really like putting these things together to learn together. And it's not, we're not like an investment group. We're not an investment advisory group. We're not sitting here like, you need to buy this coin because you're going to make $1 million. We want to spread kind of knowledge about what exactly is this stuff. Right. And I am, my background is I'm a director of IT for a medical device company. I'm an adjunct professor for a local college here on Long Island. And I own a software development company that specializes in custom web development. So I do a lot of programming. I have a computer science background, and I really enjoy learning and using the technology. Craig, you want to maybe say something about yourself?
Sure. So I work in IT as well. I'm a project manager. I started 4 years ago exploring blockchain. I mean, for some of you that have not yet dove down the rabbit hole, I promise you will, because once we tease you with the sum of how this works, there's no going back. So a little bit of our incentive here, as Nick explained, we teach ourselves what we need to learn so that we can teach all of you. And that's truly our incentive. And without further ado, I'm really excited to show you what we learned here.
Yeah, cool. So more importantly, a little bit about you. And we appreciate you guys. You went ahead and we asked a simple question when you guys signed up for this. What are you looking to learn about NFTs? And we put together this little word cloud here that has all of the different things that you guys have had asked. The creative process around this. How is it the art and records? How are we keeping a record of this stuff? How do we sell it? Things like the EIP 1155, which we're going to get into a little bit later, royalties and things like that. So we hope to answer all these questions during
let's not lose the environmental impact, because that one's an easy one to call out and talk about really quick. The environmental impact, I never understood much of that narrative. If anyone actually called that one out as what they'd like to understand, please speak up. But the environmental impact is not because of an NFT. The environmental impact is because there's a cost of running the backbone of all blockchains. And the way a blockchain works, and it's really a proof of work mechanism, which is what Bitcoin typically runs on, or does run on. People are using their computers to solve a really difficult math problem. There's no reason. But when they solve that math problem, they are then rewarded with Bitcoin. And there's really no efficiency to it. It is solve the math problem, get the Bitcoin. And that is where the narrative of the environmental impact comes from. We're not doing anything with all that compute power other than solving a math problem just so that we can maintain this ledger. I'm not saying that it's not worthwhile, but that's, I think, where the story of environmental impact comes from.
That's interesting. I read something not too long ago, kind of exploring where this was more for Bitcoin, exploring where all of the actual hash power is coming from. And as most of you probably know, it's mostly coming from China, and it's coming from areas of China where they produce more energy than they actually consume. And they're using that surplus in the mining operations. I think the Bitcoin has grown so much now that these mining companies are playing energy arbitrage, right? They're going around the world and they're finding places where energy is cheap so that they can be more profitable in their mining operations. So there is an argument that a lot of these mining operations are using energy that would have been produced anyway, that literally is just being wasted. And they're using it because it's seemingly free, because there's a lot of supply in these areas, but not as much demand. So it's still a problem, right? It's definitely not a good thing.
And that's why, we are believers in Ethereum, which is moving their consensus mechanism over to proof of stake as opposed to proof of work. But that is an entirely separate conversation.
Right. Okay.
Most of the Ethereum miners like that?
What's that?
Well, yes and no. When you say the Ethereum miners, when you move to something like proof of stake, the barrier to entry is reduced, tremendously. Even on Coinbase, unless you live in New York, and I think I saw one of those complaints.
Why does New York block us?
Unless you live in New York, I think the major exchanges are even offering ETH2 staking, like Coinbase. So the barrier to entry on doing the mining is just so much lower on proof of stake. You can't, we can't generalistically say all miners hate this, because now there's an opportunity for so many more miners. The legacy miners aren't big fans, though.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. So let's back up a little bit. And before we can really start to dive into NFTs, I think it's important to understand what smart contracts are. Right? Because an NFT is basically a piece of information within a smart contract, right? And the smart contract idea was really brought to life with Ethereum. There's a lot of other chains that are now using the same principles of Ethereum to provide a smart contract environment. But fundamentally speaking, without getting technical at all, it's code stored on the blockchain. That's what a smart contract is, right? With Bitcoin, we don't have that. We just basically have a blockchain that stores value, literally just stores a value, like a number, right? So with Ethereum, we now have the ability to include data in our transactions and create places to store code right on the blockchain. So you can kind of visualize that in the light of this visualization, where all these little blocks are actual pieces of code that we can execute. And that creates a really powerful environment for us as creators and as users of these networks. So we have this code It's distributed across all of the nodes on the network, all around the world, that we can then execute by just calling into it.
No server needed. We're all the server.
Yeah, and for those of folks here that have IT backgrounds, you know, serverless is a bit of a buzzword with a lot of different cloud providers today, where you host a function on a server and you could just call it, and you're saying it's serverless, still technically as a server, and there still technically is a piece of there's a computer someplace executing this code, but the way it's run is distributed, and who runs it is incentivized by the entire gas system on the network. And that's what Ethereum technically is. Ethereum, by holding Ethereum, you're holding compute power on the network. That's fundamentally what it is. So it allows you to actually execute code. And we're going to see that at the tail end of this presentation. When we actually mint the ticket to this event, you'll see how your transaction is going to use some gas, which is some ether, a very small amount of ether, to actually change the code within the actual blockchain.
You're paying everyone to accept your transaction and change the state of the blockchain.
Right. So just like we have an address, right? So like the addresses that we've been sharing with you guys to be able to pass around ether, this code, the smart contract, is also available by address. So we can go ahead and address these different areas on the blockchain and then access the code that is within it. And again, for folks that have a more of a technical background, you can think of this as open APIs all across the entire network. And us as developers, if you're a front-end developer, you can put interfaces or user interfaces on top of those APIs and truly make this completely serverless front end that has integrated payment processing and things like that, because it's innate in the Ethereum blockchain, which is really exciting. So
along blockchain.
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Was all right, so I'll keep going. So this idea of a programmable value storage is obviously creating this crazy hotbed for innovation, right? There's all these interesting projects coming up. There's also a lot of scam happening. A lot of, you know, there's a lot of land grabs going on for value, and as a result of that, folks are going to try to take advantage of people. That's just human nature, right? So it's although there's a lot of exciting legitimate things happening, there's also exciting illegitimate things happening. And that's something that, you know, in this community here on Long Island, hopefully we can create a community that wants to create value and actually build things.
And the more you know, the less you'll get scammed.
Exactly. That's a great point, right? So, yeah.
So right here, you have a quote from our new SEC chairman, which is just fantastic. So anyone that has, knows about Gary Gensler, he's been leading blockchain-based courses at MIT for 3 years now. And you'll get a chance to click on this link or copy it, but he wrote an article just talking about the evolution of fintech and how we've achieved what we've achieved to date and how everything has to change. And keep in mind that this is our new SEC chairman. So really, he's sworn in for the next 5 years. You can do a lot of things in the next 5 years.
It's going to be really interesting to see, like, is that a good thing or bad thing for the overall blockchain communities? And we have somebody, I guess, in office now that knows the stuff, right? So that's a good thing, I think. But we'll see what happens. But I think this quote, the reason why we put this in here is because I think it illustrates that he does know what this stuff is, right? Open banking and open application programming interfaces is kind of what we were just discussing before. But this idea of open banking is really important. And I think for most of us on this call, which, we're probably all in America or in a country that has a banking infrastructure, we can go and open up a bank account. But there's a lot of people on this planet that don't have that privilege. And there's probably more of those people than people that actually have access to the banking infrastructure that we do as Americans. So these networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum now have the ability for anybody that has literally a cell phone to be able to open up a bank account, and we can send value directly to them, or they can execute the code on the blockchain right from those devices. So that's an insanely powerful thing that I think a lot of people miss when they're like, well, why do we need this technology? What does it matter? And for many things that we do today, it's, we can do them with regular central banks, but this is kind of a bigger picture thing, right? This is a global thing. I think that's really important.
Yeah, there's a ongoing theory that the financial system and money shouldn't be state owned. It's public service and good. So everyone should have access to it. Everyone should be able to cooperate and work with one another. These blockchain based, give us an opportunity to do it without needing an intermediary like a bank.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, because of this, because we have this smart contract technology, right? And that's a general technology. There's a programming language, which we'll show off in a minute, called Solidity, and a couple of others that we write code in, and we can then take that code and deploy it into a smart contract. Now, that's all well and good, but if everyone is writing different pieces of code and putting it up to the blockchain, now every one of those APIs, those interfaces for us to call into and use, are going to be different, which means that if any one of you wants to use one of these smart contracts, you need to know how to use it. You need to learn how to use it. And say if there's a million smart contracts on the network, and each one of those has a different set of tools. So every single function that you can call into is named something different. The parameters are completely different, right? It's just a different tool. Like you can think of it like a physical tool, like a hammer being forwards or backwards or sideways. Like they're completely different every time you use it. You're going to be like, okay, well, this type of hammer, I need to swing sideways to use it. This type, I need to swing like this. It's going to be a little harder to use. And
no adoption.
No adoption. It's going to be, yeah, exactly. It's going to be hard. So what's happening is the community is coming together in the open with these requests for comments and these proposals that come out, and people talk about them, and they go back and forth, and sometimes it gets heated. It gets argued, people argue and things like that. But these standards are emerging from those open conversations. This is off blockchain. This is more of an open source type of idea, where open source technology and people around the world sharing ideas are building and kind of cementing these standards. And the first one that really exploded was this one. And we did a whole talk on this a couple of months back, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the ERC20 standard is the fungible token standard, which is basically just a way to represent a balance. That's it. So this is where we get this idea of creating your own token on Ethereum or other blockchains. And that just basically says, hey, I have a smart contract. That smart contract has really a single variable that has the total supply, and then it has the ability to chop that total supply up into different accounts. So my account may have 100, Craig's account may have 100, Tom's account may have 100, right? And that's it. The value we have is represented by a balance, and that's it. Now, the reason why the standard is important is because now, if there's I don't know, how many ERC20 tokens are on the network now, Craig? Like 300,000?
Yeah, too many.
Something crazy. But every single one of those has the same interface. That means that if you know how to communicate with one of those smart contracts, you know how to communicate with every single one of them. And that is insanely powerful. That's how things like Uniswap comes into existence. Uniswap couldn't exist if we didn't have standard interfaces, because it needs to know how to call into transfer functions and things like that. It needs those standards. You can even take this a step back and talk about like standards on the internet, right? Like TCP/IP. The internet wouldn't work if we didn't have protocols in place that were standard. Tachi wanted to get in on the conversation.
Yeah. Every time I go into a meeting.
That's why I'm
Yeah. So for the purposes of this call, you did a great job explaining it, but I just want to focus on that fungible token being, that F. in what will be the non-fungible token, NFT, in the next standard. So
Yes.
in the next page. And that's just, as you mentioned, every single component is just exactly the same as every other of the total supply. So you have a total supply of 300 coins. Nick has 100, Tom has 100, I have 100. Every single one is exactly the same as the other. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Awesome. So now that kind of leads us into the next standard that's emerging, right? Or really, I should say has emerged, which is the one we're talking about today. That is the ERC 721 token, which is our non-fungible token. Now, this is a little bit different from an ERC 20, right? So instead of just representing a balance, we're now keeping track of specific tokens and their owners. So we have a couple of slides where we're going to visualize this in a minute, but it's basically, the idea is that instead of having a proof of balance, you now have proof of ownership, right? Proof of ownership of something. Now, fundamentally, if we look at the standard just in its raw form, what you're actually owning is a number in a smart contract, literally a number. So you're saying, hey, number one, I own number one. That's it. Very simple.
And we don't even know what number one is.
I have no idea what number one is. It's just a table with the number one and the owner of that. That's what the standard actually defines. So, and you can actually see the standard in the open right here. Here's the standard. It was written by a bunch of guys here, and you can even open up the discussions that were had while it was being developed. And you can see that, there are about 380 comments. This all happened in the open on GitHub, and it's open. Like you can get into on the conversation and share your ideas about it. And eventually, once it got closed, it turns into an actual proposal, and it becomes a standard. And this actually defines the actual standard, right? Exactly what the interface should look like and things like that. So this is it, right? But what does it actually look like, right? Let's go ahead and try to visualize this, right? Instead of looking at the code, which can get a bit convoluted, and we have to know a little bit of solidity to do that, let's just fundamentally visualize what the heck is an NFT. And I think a lot of folks get this confused, right? It starts with a contract. That's the first thing. We need to define a contract. So we have this contract. I'm calling this contract my NFTs. Okay. So we have a contract. Now, once we have that contract, we have the ability to what we call mint tokens inside of it. Now, we can mint tokens when we create the contract, or we can mint tokens when we call into the contract. They could be an interface for us to call in and say, hey, I want to mint more tokens. And you can go ahead and do that. So that leads us to the next piece, which is we can now mint tokens. Now, if we stop right here, this is the standard. This is what the standard defines. This standard defines a smart contract interface that allows you to have a table, like you can think of it like an Excel spreadsheet in a sense, that has the ID and the owner of that ID. Fundamentally, that is what an NFT contract is. Now, I think there is a lot of confusion in terms of an NFT itself is a contract. An NFT itself is not a contract. It's a token or a representation of a token inside of a contract. That's a big distinction. And you can see that visually here, is that all these tokens, 1, 2, and 3, live inside of this My NFTs contract, right? Now, owning a number like ID isn't really very interesting, right? It's not gonna, I don't know about you, but I am not kind of compelled to buy this number 2 for 69 mil. Like it doesn't ring true. Maybe the number 3, I don't know, the number 3 is a little, the curves. I like the curves, you know what I mean? But, that's not gonna, nobody's gonna really have any value there, right? It's kind of hard to do that. Now, there are NFT contracts that this is all it does. And then all of the representation of what this number means is off chain, right? It's in some database off chain, and you can link to it someplace. And we're gonna look at that in a second. But a bunch of folks in some of the larger projects that exist today. I know some of the metaverse projects, like those 3D environments, decentralized land and things like that, they contributed to extending this standard. And it's been extended with this idea of metadata. So information that describes what this ID actually represents, right? And that kind of leads us to the third step here, is that we can extend this contract to include metadata about each one of these tokens. And now what the heck is metadata? What are we talking about here? So metadata is basically information that describes a token, but let's take a look at what they actually are. So I actually included some links here to some very popular NFTs. Now, these are the real metadata inside of the actual token contract. So if I click this, this is what the NFT for the every days, the first 5,000 days, the Beeple NFT looks like.
That is $70 million right there. That page.
Yeah, so this is the representation of the token. Now, this is what we call JSON data. It's encoded data. It is basically a key value type of thing. You can see here, like the title here is the every day is the first 5,000 days. And if we look here, we have an image URL, and that links out here to this crazy looking address. Now, if we go to this address, boom, this is the actual piece. This isn't a copy of the piece. This is the actual piece that's represented inside of the contract, which was sold for that amount of money. Now, this is interesting.
Notice this is not on Ethereum, and it's hosted by, as you can see in the domain, Maker's Place, using IPFS.
Yes. And I think IPFS is an extremely important topic to talk about when we talk about NFTs. And before I get into that, I want to just pull up another one here. So if we go to this second one here, this is another token that's inside of a different contract, inside of the Sandbox game contract. Anybody here hear of Sandbox? It's a pretty ambitious project that is being developed. It's one of these like kind of 3D worlds. I'm sure my kids will be playing it one of these days. And it's basically a marketplace for 3D objects, and you can buy land in it and things like that. I think it may have just launched in beta, but basically they've developed this whole world where you can buy and sell land, and you can, create a marketplace for 3D assets, similar to like Minecraft, but more of a, decentralized. But you'll notice here that the actual metadata pertaining to this token is not on chain at all. It's actually hosted on Sandbox game, right? So this information is in control of Sandbox. So there's a kind of a level of not being decentralized here, right? They have NFT contracts, but they could delete this essentially, and this would not be in the actual token anymore. And the third one here is another piece that it's a simpler piece, and this is in the, which one is this in? This is in, I think, the Maker or Foundation. I think this might be Foundation, the Foundation platform. And you can see here that the image URI is a link to IPFS with this crazy URL here. So this does use IPFS. And I'm curious. This is a little hard on Zoom, but is anybody familiar with IPFS? So IPFS stands for the Interplanetary File System, and it's crazy interesting, and it's definitely a topic in and of itself. But if we think about Ethereum like the world computer, we could think about IPFS as the world's hard drive. And this is a way, it's basically Dropbox, but for the distributed web. And the big distinction here is that it uses what's called content addressing. And that's insanely important for NFTs, because the the way the internet works today is by location addressing. So you guys may be familiar with DNS, like when we type an actual website into a browser, like the actual URL, like I typed IPFS.io. The first thing that happens there is a DNS server is queried and it says, hey, I want to go to IPFS.io. What's the address for that? And it returns an IP address. And that IP address is then the literal address of where the content is. It's like your street address. But with IPFS, it's content address, which means the actual file is hashed into this hash string, which proves that the file has not changed. And then that hash string is the address of the content. So the address, the content is now addressed by itself, essentially, through proving that this is the hash of the content. It's insane. It's pretty cool. So like you can basically go right to the content by its own address. If that content changes at all, like anything, a little bit or anything like that, the address changes. So if you were to take that Beeple piece and say, put it through a compression algorithm or change one
Sign
pixel,
your name on it.
yeah, anything, you can quickly invalidate that piece. It would not be, you can run it through the hash algorithm very easily and say, this does not match what's in the NFT contract. It's not the original piece. So that's an important thing. And IPFS is a pretty large topic, and I'm looking forward to exploring that a lot more. But you'll see in these different URIs within the actual NFTs, some use IPFS and some do not. Right? So if you don't use IPFS, that means that the content is more, it could change. The underlying content can change. I think, Craig, you had an example. Somebody on Twitter pulled the rug on their own NFTs, right? And they minted all this awesome artwork, and then a day later they changed all the metadata, and it was literally pictures of rugs.
Well, they didn't change the metadata. They changed what the metadata was pointing to, right? Instead of it being a picture of a CryptoPunk, he removed the picture of a CryptoPunk and put a rug. Because ultimately it's pointing to either a picture that's hosted by everyone, in which case IPFS, or it's hosted by someone's server, in which case, Facebook.
Yeah. Interesting. So I see some questions coming into the chat, and I think we're going to touch on this right now. Imran, you asked here, can you deploy the same NFT contract on all three platforms? So that's an important point. So right now, the visualization that we have on screen is looking at one smart contract, but this leads us to the third part of this. There can be many contracts, right? So, this My NFT one is one that we just created, but there are platforms, folks that are building businesses on top of this technology, like Rarible and OpenSea and Maker's Place and a slew of others. Each one of these does have their own smart contracts. And to answer your question, Imran, yes, you can mint them into multiple. Now, it depends on the platform. Like for example, Maker's Place and Foundation, I think Foundation too, these are curated. So there is a level of kind of central authority in these contracts. They don't openly have a mint function that you could just call and create your own NFTs. They curate the artwork, right? Maker's Place, I think, has this idea of drops where they kind of coordinate with artists and then they release the artwork. So, I think that's one way to kind of control it a bit more so that you don't have this just wild west of everyone trying to sell the same artwork in different contracts. But we are seeing it. I think just today I saw there's like Beeple contracts all over the place, people putting Beeple's work inside of these contracts and then throwing them up on different platforms to try to sell them. And it looks like they're people are buying them. And that is a key point too, Craig, you mentioned in the chat, is that because this is a standard, just like the ERC-20 standard, the interface for all of these contracts are the same. So that's like, that is enabling us to take our NFTs with us wherever we go. And this kind of gets into some really interesting things about being able to sell your NFT on multiple platforms, right? I can list it on OpenSea and maybe on Rarible as well. And then you can kind of spread it across these different platforms. That means that these platforms aren't just using their own smart contracts, but they're programming ways to read other contracts that follow the standard, if that makes sense. So any questions there? Anybody want to chime in? I'll catch up in the chat real quick.
What about copyrights and stuff like that?
No laws that really cover it yet.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I could take somebody else's
Yep. And was just recently done specifically on that Beeple $69 million NFT. There was I'll call him a white hat hacker who went and did something called sleep minting, which I was just reading about today. And he copied that NFT. He was able to transfer it to the Beeple contract and then transfer it back because he's the owner of this contract. And it basically made it look like that picture was owned by Beeple. Like, not only is it look exactly the same, but now it also looks like he had it in his wallet. He owned it. And so that's, the more significant frauds. But as far as what can you do about copyright? I mean, under what jurisdiction?
Well, if I started putting out all kinds of say Time magazine covers, in NFTs, would they come after you and say, listen, that's, we own the right photo?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to be sloppy and, so a wallet ID can be populating them. You, Tom, cannot populate them unless you make that link and connection of Tom and this wallet are one and the same, and they're the ones who are acting poorly.
Aaron, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've sort of struggled with the last few years, and there doesn't seem to be a forum that is trying to work within the existing regulatory architecture. It's almost like that's like sacrilege almost.
Yeah.
And it seems like, all of the conflicts are there, and they're not there for, some kind of like the religious reasons that people might have only. Some of them are, but, which is, the power of the intermediation and all that. But a lot of them are for those type of questions, which is, if you're going to trade something or create something that has a risk of copyright or trademark infringement, well, then you'd have insurance. If you have insurance, then it becomes a registered asset of some type, and then that can obviously fall under some regulatory regime. And that sort of, those sort of like 5 steps, people just seem to be always trying to wiggle out. Instead of
Do they try and wiggle out, or are we just not ready to provide them as an infrastructure? Right?
Well, I think the intelligence is there to provide as an infrastructure, because the existing, many of the same existing people who build a lot of this worked in other industries, banking, financial services, and built the legacy infrastructure. I think a lot of it is they just don't want to do it. And because they think it's either at a value judgment, just like it's evil, the big bad regulatory, which is true sometimes, but they can't see that we're just having the same conversation we had 4 or 5 years ago. And I work with a lot of industrial customers who just won't. I mean, there's really good applications for, in theory, blockchain for things like letters of credit, things that they basically already do, sort of ledger type databases. They just don't really know it, but they won't touch this because their insurance companies won't insure it, and it just goes down this whole rat hole.
Risk.
And, yeah, it's risk, and it's real, right? It's not just something invented by lawyers. It's something.
Right.
I
mean, to the only, there's 2 optimistic points that I have towards that. Is one, new SEC chairman, so hopefully that will get some new guidelines, and once you actually write down the rules, more people will be willing to
Yep.
say, okay, now I will play by those rules. But until they're written down, everyone's, going to sit on the sidelines. And two is, I see, I wouldn't want to diminish the efforts of some of the smartest people in the world trying just that. They're working to get, to lobby and to get it into the appropriate hands. Hester Pierce is, famously known as Crypto Mom.
Yep.
And, she's trying to do it. She's trying to set the standards and write the regulations, but it's a big job.
Yeah. So, I mean, but one thing I will say is, while there are those heroes, and I see them and read articles, there doesn't seem within the community to be.
Agreed. Well, keep in mind the community's 25 years old. They're all kids. I'm saying that in jest, but
how many people
they're all young.
Some
of the most brilliant minds, Vitalik Buterin, he's one of the most advocate for getting on the infrastructure and the rails and the architectures, but he's still only 24 years old.
Sure, but how many people here are 25 years old, right? I mean, I'm just pointing out the fact that there's a lot of let's just say mature people who've been through this or versions of this in these industries for a long time, and there just doesn't seem to be a clearinghouse that's very welcoming when it comes to that. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and I think there's probably going to be some technologies that emerge that enable some of this stuff. Like, for example, the IPFS content addressing, right? You can, if you have an asset that you have on the blockchain with some type of specific address, and the creator of that content says, I'm putting my content into this smart contract. I'm getting behind the maker contract. Now, if folks start to put that same address in other contracts, you can very easily write things that scan these smart contracts, right? And prove that, hey, this is a scam or not. And maybe even build insurance smart contracts on top of that in some way, shape, or form, right? I don't know if that's how that would be possible.
I mean, I guess the way I look at it is that there are things like B3I, which is the insurance industry initiative, but they're not generally incorporated in the front end of the spec conversations that people have. I guess that's sort of what I'm really saying, is a lot of the industries have, thought either partially or reasonably well through, and it seems to be like there's two ships passing the night, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of cross cooperation between sort of the legacy bad guys that everyone wants to disintermediate or think they do.
Yeah.
And the sort of cutting edge, change the universe crowd. And so we just burn time, it is, I guess, the way I look at it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that does. I mean, when I first approached the NFT stuff, I thought I was of that opinion, like, oh, it's just like you could put anything out there and sell it. But we're seeing these platforms come up where they're still controlling this. This is still very much people building on top of this technology. It's not just completely open in many respects in terms of like the different platforms, but you're right. I mean, this has got, the regulatory frameworks need to develop around this, and there needs to be some learning from the past, right? We can't say that the past was 100% wrong, right? And not apply any of it. I think it's not going to be good for us, but cool.
So now that we know that there are no laws on this, let's go and see how we can build them and sell them.
I think there is some reluctance for the new guard to pass on, or to allow the old guard some room to make regulations. Is the whole thing with blockchain in the beginning was, take away that intermediary, peer-to-peer. And maybe the same thing. People that are doing this don't want to have other people regulate them. I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of artists, like for the NFT stuff, artists seems to be the buzz right now. Everyone's thinking that this could be really good for artists and creators, and I think that's really important for them. I think there is a layer that is being peeled away here. Like we saw the revolution happen with MP3s and the streaming platforms, but artists are still kind of like the pushed to the side a bit in terms of what they're getting by engaging with these platforms and putting their content onto these platforms. And I think NFT technology and blockchain technology in general is kind of peeling that back a little bit more, where they can get more data from this, right? So if you put an album on as an NFT within a smart contract you choose, now as an artist, I could say 5 years down the road, I want to make tickets to an event available to the folks that bought that album 5 years ago. And I'm not going to check any other smart contract out there that tried to scam it and resell it and break the law. I'm only going to check the smart contract that I put my creative work inside of, right? Because I think from an artist perspective, many of them, want their content shared, right? Openly, right? So it's, of course, they want to make money with it as well. But I would argue a large majority of artists would want to see their art shared, right? If it's not shared, no one's the
Sure,
value.
but I mean, most artists, the thing they protect is provenance, and so that's kind of the crucial. And so that's the piece that I think the sharing part. Let's just put it this way: I think the Napster part of blockchain is proven. I think everybody knows it works.
Mhm.
It flies. It goes like wildfire. It's these validation and verification components that I think that infrastructure, there seems to be a culture that doesn't value that as much as the sharing side. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think the community has a difficulty understanding the difference of this pseudo anonymity,
Yep.
and the decentralized, I don't need anybody to prove, that I own this nature of things, like it's in the code, therefore I own it. But that doesn't really work with NFTs, because, when you're talking about an artist's property, you're still using their identity, their accountability. They need to authenticate it.
That's right.
Without their authentication, I mean, it's, as Nick showed, it's a one and then it's an address.
Well, and to take it a step further, the more sophisticated, or the more the more what would be the right word, when basically when something is sold over and over again. I always forget that word, but the more of those type of transactions that occur, which is where you get complexity. It's like basically like custody of the provenance. There's a term for it. I forget what it is, but it's like the custody
perpetuity or something.
Yeah. So that, like say, whatever, your grandpa, bought a Ted Williams or had a Ted Williams baseball card as a kid, kept it, but then sold it to someone else. And then it just by the time he gets to the fifth person, or the fifth entity, whatever that is, you want to be able to prove the provenance of that backwards as a mechanism of.
Yes. And the royalties are coded in because, this is a contract. So anytime that album or that piece of music is sold, automatically, without any intermediary, it's that person
that gets hard, because the challenge is a lot of royalty. There's a lot of complexity in royalties, in terms of terms, in terms of
terms would certainly complicate things. I'm talking about, keep it at its most basic form. I, the creator, anytime that piece of art is ever sold, I want to get 10%.
Yeah.
Keep it as simple as that one logic claim, and it can be done for the next 1,000 years. I could be long, good, and dead, but my estate will still be receiving those funds automatically.
And I think that's going to be the test, is that there's going to have to be a set of sort of use case or personas that are defined as vanilla, where that will be the sort of transactional integrity. And then when there's more complex cases, either they are, componentized, and somehow able to, some type of component-based architecture can pull them back together.
Yeah.
And validate them, so that if all the other claims that exist, they can all have their own, in essence, sort of sleeve or vessel or channel.
Yeah. And that's exciting because if this continues to grow, those types of things are going to emerge, right? Like these standards we're looking at now, these are pretty simple standards. There's a ton of problems that are being exposed, right? Where we're like, how does this work? How does this work? This isn't defined yet. What's going on here? And if this continues to grow, I think we're going to see that, right? We're starting to see some of the composable smart contract architectures emerge now off of some of these standards. And it'll be exciting to see that, where like, yeah, you maybe you will have some complex royalty deal that isn't a simple kind of naive 10%. It's more of like, well, this entity gets this or whatever it is. But I would think you can probably codify a lot of that stuff, right? In many respects. Maybe you can, right? Maybe some of it's not fully codifiable, but
New world. If it's
yeah.
not in the old world, it will be in the new world.
Yeah. All right, so let's continue here. So we what are we owning? I think we just had a really great discussion around that, and there are a ton of problems there. But let's explore a little bit in terms of what exactly do these look like on some of these platforms. And I think OpenSea does a really good job because OpenSea aggregates a lot of different platforms into their own platform here. So I'm on the test net here. So let me go ahead and flip over to the main net. And you can see here that this platform allows you to kind of go into the different kind of categories here. You have domain names, virtual worlds, this and that, right? So let's go ahead and scroll through here and let's just look at one of these. So let's look at this one. If you look at this, you can go down the chain info and you can see the contract that this piece of artwork actually lives in. In this case, just because of this token ID, I can see that it lives in the OpenSea open store contract here. And this will take you right to Etherscan. Now, if anybody hasn't used Etherscan yet, Etherscan is basically a blockchain explorer for Ethereum. And you can see all of the transactions that have happened against this contract. And depending on how the contract was published, you can see its code here. It looks like they've only published the actual bytecode. There are tools to actually decompile this, but you can't really go much further than that with this here. And if you click here, this has a little tracker in it. Because the bytecode's here, I don't think you can use, we can't interact with this contract here. But some of these, you can actually interact with this contract. And we actually put out a YouTube video not too long ago where I did this with the Beeple and the Maker version 2 contract, where I went through and I actually demonstrated how to pull out the token IDs from these contracts. Let me close some of these windows. And basically what it's going to resolve to is this, right? It's going to resolve to this JSON data that allows you to just get the metadata for that given token. So where did my OpenSea go? So go back to OpenSea. This is where you can kind of
Picasso Punk.
What's that?
Your Picasso Punk tab on the right.
Oh, get this out of here. This little guy. It's all good. So let's see. Most of these probably are going to be in the OpenSea contracts. And I don't think you can filter by specific platforms here. This is a good one. Autoglyphs. I really like this one. So Autoglyphs is like cyberpunks, I think made by the same guys. And this is a cool contract because it has all of the information. There is no metadata associated with this. All of the information pertaining to the generation of this piece of art is right on chain within the smart contract itself. So if we look at this smart contract, we can see that this is the Autoglyph smart contract. We can go to the actual contract here, read the contract, and plug in the token URI here. And this is the URI of the token contract. It's embedded data that is right in the contract. Now, what you could do is you could take this information and render it. This information is what's used to render that image, which is right on chain, which is super cool. And this is the first smart contract to really do that and have this kind of art, on-chain generative art, which is kind of exciting. And I think these are going off the shelf for a pretty high
And this
price.
one's, this one isn't as you said, you don't need a hosted service there. It's all on chain. So this is one of the, you know, those pieces where you don't actually need to trust an authenticated, you know, creator. It is what it is because it exists in perpetuity throughout Ethereum. Anyone that runs Ethereum node has that picture automatically in it.
Exactly. Yeah. Pretty cool. And you can, oh, go ahead, Judy.
So if I was to go into Etherscan and look through the different blocks, how do you identify which ones are pieces of art versus how do you identify the art versus land or whatever?
You wouldn't be able to do that from the Etherscan website itself. You'd have to, wherever you're looking at across the web, you can say, okay, that contract address, show me what it is on Etherscan. And that's how you'll be able to get its source.
Yeah, and typically too, Judy, you're going to be using some type of front end that is going to show you or render information about that token for you. So, you know, I would recommend if you're putting any real value in this, you want to verify that, you know, the smart contract and how it's there and things like that. But I don't think most people are doing that. You can use a platform like OpenSea and, you know, browse around like we're doing right now. And these platforms already have, you know, built-in bidding systems in place where you can come out here and actually buy this NFT. Or in the same token, as we'll see when we mint the ticket, you can also go out here and sell these NFTs. So, you know, they go right into your wallet. The proof of ownership is right into your digital wallet. And you then have claim to that token within the smart contract. And because it's using a standard, it could move with you to different platforms. It's not a database record in some proprietary system. It's a database record in a worldwide ledger, which is the blockchain inside of it.
Earlier that maybe you clarified it, because you said that one contract could be shown across the various platforms, but unless you move it from platform to platform, they won't know about it and they won't see it, but
Won't matter.
you could move it.
No, if it's sold on any one platform, it's sold on all platforms because the platform's not actually doing anything within its own platform. It's just allowing you to engage with Ethereum, who's doing the transaction, is actually sending it from one wallet to another.
Okay, so if I put something up on Rarible, you're saying I can then see it on OpenSeas without
Yes.
doing anything? Yeah, how
Not
does
doing
it
anything.
know about that contract that Rarible posted?
Because it's looking for the ERC 721 standard in your wallet address.
So that was my original question, that how does it know if it's art on the Ethereum chain versus other stuff? Because it's got to be marked by the ERC 721.
Well, those platforms are specifically designed to be reading wallets and looking for 721s.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah. So like if I pull up my wallet address here, this is on the mainnet. This is a wallet. You can see here, if I drop this down, I have an ERC 721 token in this wallet. It's a ENS name. So it represents a domain name on the Ethereum name system. And you can easily query addresses from a front-end application and say, what tokens are in this wallet? And anyone can do that. There's no barrier for you to do that. It's not like I have to go and consume an API on OpenSea and get an API key from them and things like that. It's an open environment. So any platform can say, hey, I see that you have an LIBC ticket from this event. Awesome. Let me go ahead and, you know, make the background a cool, different thing or something like that. You know, create a customized experience for you because you have that token.
Okay, I guess I need to, I know blockchain pretty well, Bitcoin rather. So I guess this
Cool.
is another version of it. All right, thanks.
No problem. Yeah, and I think that's really exciting too, because I think you're going to see a lot of things like that. That was pretty big. It still is big in web development to create these customized experiences, mostly for marketing purposes, where, we show you different ads that, based on cookies that are set in your system. I think we're going to see that start to emerge based on what's in your wallet. You're gonna get different things served up to you.
That's what I'd like to build.
Yeah, and that's gonna be interesting because it's not gonna be run by well, I guess there could be specific ad platforms and traditional things, but new things will also emerge that we don't even know of yet. So awesome. So those are some of the ways that you can explore these things. OpenSea is a good place to go. A lot of the other ones, like Foundation, these are more of a closed kind of curated system. These will not aggregate multiple contracts. And they're doing that on purpose because they're creating more of a platform that's like an exclusive kind of art platform. It's more of a curated type of thing.
They won't sell anyone's junk. They'll sell only stuff that
only their junk.
Yeah, only from their authenticated artists.
And that's great. Look at that.
Suck my dick.
That's beautiful.
That's awesome.
Great. Curated.
At least he's authenticated.
Great. Beautiful. Excellent. I'm going to blur that one out in the. All right. So awesome. So how do we actually create our own, right? What I see some people in the chat like, all right, when are we going to get into some of the code stuff? Now I don't want to get too complicated here. I know with the ERC 21, I went a little crazy with some of the code, but we can go deep. We could stay on the surface. There are really two fundamental ways to create your own NFT. There's the hard way by programming it. And this way, you'd probably want to choose this way if you have some type of unique aspect to whatever you're trying to do, right? If you're
like a royalty.
Like a royalty, exactly. That's a good one because that's a pretty simple one to program, and it is in some of the contracts already. But if you wanted to do some type of special type of loyalty, like if you want to get more complicated with maybe splitting payments between multiple addresses, or maybe even paying a royalty from another smart contract that executes a token exchange or something, you could do that. So there's a lot of different, basically it provides the most flexibility for you to create a system that would fit whatever needs you're trying to do, right? And this is, like we were talking about before, this is an older debate too. Like, should I build the software or should I use an off-the-shelf piece of software? And that's something that you need to kind of evaluate when you're looking at a specific project that you're looking to do. I think the musician too, what's his name, Craig? The musician that just sold his album for a ton of money.
Blau, Kings of Leon.
Yeah, Blau was saying how they chose to, I think, create their own because they had some pretty unique aspects of how they were distributing the artwork itself. So what does programming it look like? And I have a sample project out here that we'll click into here. Oops, I didn't want to go out of the slides. This sample project, it's pretty simple. So there's a couple of frameworks that we need to be aware of in order to create these types of systems. And these are different from the last time we did the ERC 20 because this stuff is changing like crazy. And the first one is this hard hat system. So hard hat is an awesome kind of development environment. It just kind of ships with some structure for us as developers, and provide some scripts and things like that for us to do some of the boilerplate things that everyone's going to need to do. And because it's pretty early in this kind of world right now, it's a pretty lightweight system. It's not very heavy, and I found it really nice to use. Some other ones are like Truffle is another competing one. I've used that one as well, and they're both pretty strong. So Hard Hat allows us to find these configurations and things like that for how we can deploy to network. So if we look at this defines some information about how we can actually deploy to given network. So here I have it configured to deploy to a local network, a test network, and mainnet. Really important thing to do here, and I've made this mistake, is here you actually have your private keys because you need to sign a transaction in order to get it up to the network. So when you compile your smart contract, after it's compiled, you're going to have some bytecode. You're going to now put that bytecode inside of a transaction, and send it up to the network. And that's going to return to you an address. And that address is going to be your contract address. But in order to do that, you need to sign it with your private key, because that proves that you are the actual owner of the transaction that you want to get into the blockchain. What you do not want to do is put any of that private key information into a public GitHub repository. I did that by accident a couple of years ago, and luckily I didn't have a lot of money in a wallet, but there are bots just scanning GitHub for idiots like myself that pushed it up there, and it was drained in a matter of minutes. And I think I was on the phone with you, Craig, when that was happening. I said, there's got to be a bug in MetaMask. Something is wrong with MetaMask.
And this was pre gas wars. So submitting the transactions really didn't do much. And they were ruthless because they didn't know how much was in the wallet. They just kept submitting transactions of like, can I get this much out? Yep. Okay. Let me divide it in half. Let me get this much out. And they took like 8 or 9 transactions to drain your $150. Yeah. Which 5 years ago is probably now, like they stole 10 grand from you.
Yeah, they probably did. I don't want to think about that. Let's move on. So what you can do here is this is using a Node.js project called dot environment that allows you to store private information locally, so that you'll hopefully never commit it. You want to put it in your gitignore file and things like that, so that you will not include it when you commit these and share these with other people.
So they got your Ethereum.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of stunk. But so where's the meat of this? Where's the actual contract? So that's going to live in this contracts folder. And here is the actual contract file. Now let's go ahead and open this bad boy up. This is the NFT contract that we're all going to interact with. Well, hopefully all of us will interact with today. And this is a super simple contract. It's 33 lines of code, and it defines basically 3 methods here. We have our constructor. The constructor, for those of us that are familiar with object-oriented programming, is the method that's called when we create an instance of this contract. So what you're looking at right here will allow us to create many NFT contracts. This is not just one. So this is going to allow us to continuously pump these out, right? This is kind of a template. You can think of it like a template where we pass into the constructor the name, the symbol, and the contract metadata. So we can have metadata that describes the entire contract, very similar to that JSON file that we showed off before. But the real meat of this, and the real important part of this, is this bad boy right here, this mint function. Let me zoom in a little bit. Is this mint function? This mint function right now is public. So we've marked this function public. So once this is deployed to the blockchain, anybody on the network can call it, anybody. And when they do call it, they need to pass in the owner and some URI to the token metadata, which would be a URL to that JSON data that we just looked at. That JSON data format does matter. That the keys that are in that JSON, they do matter because that's what the platforms will read in order to grab the image and the name and things like that and render it to the screen. But this mint function is really simple. All it does is increment the token ID. So we're going to go ahead and +1 to the number of token IDs and that table we showed before. We're going to call an internal mint function. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we're going to also call a internal set token URI function. Now, we're doing this here because we're actually building this on top of a framework. We're not writing everything from scratch. Because this is so, it's early, but it's not crazy early. There are frameworks starting to emerge that allow us to create these smart contracts using tested code that has already been out there in the marketplace. And what we're using for this is called Open Zeppelin. Now this is kind of emerging as a very popular one. If folks here on the call are into like web development things, they can think of like Ruby on Rails and Symfony and PHP and things like that. Those types of environments allow us to kind of get to market quicker and do things faster. and not have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. So this project, Open Zeppelin, I encourage developers on the call to go ahead and check this out. They're actually building a business around security audits, and all of these contracts have been audited by them, and they put it out for free under the GPL license to be able to use. And all the code is available. It's on GitHub, and it's pretty cool. So like you can go on GitHub here and you can look at the actual contracts, and there are a ton of them. So like you have governance contracts, different proxy contracts. Here's your token contracts. Here's the 721. And this kind of gets into what we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of composable, component-based architecture. The regular ERC 721 is filled with a bunch of other subcontracts. So like you can see here, here's the interface for the metadata standard. And by doing this kind of object-oriented pattern here, we're able to compose together different functionalities and put together different smart contracts with different features and functions within them. And that's really important. And I think we're definitely going to continue to see a lot of different innovation coming out of things we already know in the software development world, being applied to this new world here with smart contract development. And you can see here's the extensions. We have all these different types of extensions, and there's a lot of different ways to create and compose these contracts. For example, I'll give you a few examples. If you want to make a token burnable, do you want to be able to destroy a token after it's created, right? Once you deploy a smart contract and it doesn't have that functionality, or it doesn't have functionality you want, it's hard to change that. You technically can't change it, right? There's patterns emerging for us to upgrade contracts, but if a fundamental example, if I mint a token in this project I'm showing you here, I'm not going to be able to delete it, which may be a good thing, but for your application, you may want to be able to delete it, right? You maybe want to say after a certain time, this token goes away. You won't be able to do that unless you program it up front. So it's important to kind of think about these projects. It kind of puts us into this different mind frame than a traditional web development mind frame, where it's kind of just like, yeah, push the code, push the code, push the code. We can always fix it. So we'll go. It's a little different with smart contract development. You can't operate at that speed and kind of agility when you are minting these smart contracts, permanently. So that's important.
For those of us that aren't going to do this.
Yeah. So how many folks, anybody have any questions here? How many folks are on here that are looking to program their own smart contracts? And does anybody have any specific questions regarding this topic?
I'm a little lost. Are non-fungible tokens smart contracts?
Yes, absolutely. So non-fungible token is non-fungible tokens live inside of a smart contract.
Okay. And then once it's created, you can't change it.
Unless you program functionality to change it.
The beginning. Right. Basically, a lot of times, I'm looking at contract. I sell real estate, and a lot of times contracts go back and forth between the seller and the buyer and constantly being changed. I imagine once you get, if you wanted to put it on the blockchain, once you got it completely executed where there's no more changes. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. I think that's where a lot of the learning from traditional practices is going to come to play. And how do we codify that inside of smart contracts? We wouldn't be able to represent a real estate contract without considering iterations in the verbiage and in just basic changes. So we would have to write that into this code. So if we called this contract real estate, right, we wouldn't just have a mint function. We would have maybe a change function or something like that would be callable, so we can change things, but we'd probably want to restrict who can call that. So maybe, when this contract gets created, maybe a buyer and a seller are, you know, the parties involved with the contract, and maybe a third party, you know, lawyer or title company or something. And those are only the folks that would be able to call those specific functions. And
Right.
that kind of gets into like role-based authority in these contracts. And that's something that Open Zeppelin is also, you know, in the open, it's open source, we can all contribute to it, is developing, where we can have different types of roles in these contracts.
My question is, like Craig was saying, since none of us are going to be doing this, is there like, you know, years ago when in order to create a website, you had to know all the different things, coding or DOS or all these different other programmable things to create your own website. Today, you can go to like, I don't know, any company, ABC company website creating, and you give them $50 and it's all paint by numbers. You'll go in. Is that where Hard Hat comes in? Is there like a thing where if I want
That's actually where Rarible and OpenSea and Foundations all come in. And I think that's where we're going to
Exactly.
go is,
Yeah.
you know,
They're-
those websites are built
those-
entirely on one contract or
and they're like, you know, step by step where like for lay people who want to create an NFT, and they'll just say, okay, enter this into this box, enter this into this box.
let's go
Yeah.
do one on Nick. You have OpenSea. It's OpenSea that does a test net, right?
Open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're actually going to do it together, and I think Tom, you do have some test ethers, so we're gonna do that, and you're gonna see how that actually works. So like that's exciting. Is that, yeah, you're 100% correct. There are emerging front ends being built on top of this that make it really accessible to create these NFTs in already existing smart contracts. But
Okay.
it isn't. I think it is important to note, and I talk with clients all the time about this. Is, you know, you can use a canned solution, and in many cases, those canned solutions will be just fine for your application. But when you want to do really kind of unique things, or you have some really core differentiating factor in something you're trying to do, be it a business or whatever, you're typically going to have to write custom code to do that. And that's where you get into this world where you're writing these contracts.
Out of the box doesn't work unless you put yourself in a box.
Yeah, I love that. That's good. Yeah, exactly.
I just came up with that one.
So any other questions on the coding side of things? We can too have specific meetups around the code. Personally, I welcome that. I want to do more of that. I'm a coder myself, and I'd like to learn more about how to build these actual marketplaces instead of using them. And so like I want to do more of that.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So after you're done like coding up the NFT, would you be able to put it onto like a place like OpenSea and stuff like that?
Yes, absolutely. And the cool thing about that is it OpenSea will automatically read your wallet and see any NFTs that you have in different contracts because of the standard, and you'll be able to put it right up. So we're gonna show that off in a minute. So stay tuned on that. That's gonna be cool.
Using those platforms like OpenSea and Rarible, etc. What you're going to do is you're literally going to say, I want to name it this, and here is, and I'm going to upload this JPEG. It does the rest.
Yeah. So like if we go, you know, the next phase of this is the easy way, right? And if we go to say, I want to go to a second one. I'm opening up so much tabs here. Let's get out of these. If we go to Rarible, we can quickly click this create button, and we can say, all right, create a collectible, a single one. And now it's saying choose a collection here. We can choose to mint into their existing contract, which is the Rarible contract, or we can create our own contract, the ERC 721 contract. So we can simply go here and upload some type of file, you know, PNG, a GIF, whatever we want to do. We can put it immediately on sale, and we can kind of set some of these parameters here. We can then put all the metadata about this right here. We can also set a royalty percent. So if we want to say, give me 10% every time this sells, we can put that there. And then we can put any properties here that we want. I guess they're giving an example of size or something like that. Now, once we do this, this is going to go ahead and fire off a transaction and actually putting it into the contract for us. Or we could do it like this and create our own, which this is going to be more expensive because we're actually creating a full contract. So the last time I tried to do this, it cost about like $700 or something like that. It was something.
It was over 800 when we were trying to do it.
Was it? Let's see if I think I'm still connected to the. Yeah, look at that. Oh, look at that. So right now to do this is going to cost about $1,000. That's expensive. So, and that's a whole nother topic about gas fees and things like that. But that's
So let's look at the inverse, going on Rareable's contract. So think about what we're doing here. If you have the create your own NFT slide still up.
Yeah, so let's see if I go here and try to maybe mint this ship, right? I'll say ship. This is a ship. I want 10%. Let's make this 69 mil, guys. All right, and create the item. Now this is going to go ahead and try to do this. $14. So that's a much different.
And what I wanted to show, if you'll go back to the create your own NFT slides, the one where you show the NFT contracts.
Oh, the visualization of it? This one?
Yes. So wait, yeah, any one of those. So by minting it and adding it to Rarible, all you've done is said, we're going to create ID number 4, and I'm going to put it to your wallet address. And that metadata is the link that you provided me of where or actually what they're going to do is they're going to host it, but that's a link of where they're hosting the image that you gave them. That's it. That's the only thing Rarible is doing when you're creating an NFT on their website.
Yep. And you're also adding value to Rarible's contract, right? You're increasing the kind of network effect that's happening on their platform because you're putting it into their contract. But in doing so, it also costs $14 as opposed to $1,000. So that's a big pull, right? So Tina, you're asking how much money does Rarible keep? That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. Do you know?
They have a fee. I don't know what it is, but they take a rake on every transaction.
Yes, and that's a great point too. Is obviously these guys are trying to build a business. They are building a business, so they're going to take fees on this. And yeah, I'm sure they're making a killing, Tina. I'm sure. So I'm just looking at the chat here. Dr. Yutsky, if you're not skilled smart contract decoder, so having a smart contract audit before. Yes, that's a great point. So Dr. Yutsky, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I appreciate that comment here. He says in the chat, if you're not a skilled smart contract coder, he strongly suggests having a smart contract audit before deployment to the mainnet to check for security vulnerabilities. I absolutely second that. There's a whole industry emerging around smart contract audits, and I think you can find a pretty wide range of folks that will do audits. I did a price comparison not too long ago for some of the things that were happening with Uniswap, and it seemed like it was pretty expensive. But you definitely want to make sure that if you're storing any value in this smart contract, that it is in fact secure. And you don't want to deploy this, then it just gets drained because there's a security hole in it. And that's
because you put your private key in the GitHub.
Yeah, exactly. and that's probably one of the biggest risks is bugs in code. There are bugs in code, right? So yeah, having
you compared yourself against Uniswap, but Uniswap does $1 billion a day in transactions. So there's certainly a scale here.
There's definitely a scale. So yeah, so that and any one of these platforms, are OpenSea and Rarible, the two ones that kind of openly let you mint into their smart contracts. But OpenSea is unique in the sense that it does aggregate a lot of the platforms. So it's going to go ahead and read other smart contracts.
And they do that from their front end.
They do it from the front end, exactly. So
Just straight JavaScript calling into a function on Ethereum.
yes, and that leads us to the last piece here, guys, which is we're at about 9:30, so we've been going for about an hour and a half here. Claim your NFT ticket. Now, one really exciting aspect of this, I think, is for ticketing and for proving that you were someplace at some time. And that's going to be something that sticks in your wallet forever, as long as you have that wallet. So what we did was we took the contract code that we just showed off that's on GitHub, and we minted it to the testnet. And Craig just went ahead and posted a link to this right into the chat. So if you go to this address, you're going to see this screen here. Now, this is only on Gorelli. So if you have test ether, if you don't already have test ether, post your address in the chat and we'll get you some. If you have test ether, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the test net here, dropping down here and going right to Gorelli. And you're going to be asked to connect your wallet to this application. You can go ahead and click connect wallet. This will pop up. It's going to say, hey, do you want to connect the wallet? Hit next, connect. That's going to go ahead and connect your wallet to the web application. And just a side note, doing all of this front-end development, we are building out content on our YouTube channel. I have a series that I've been posting pretty much weekly to exactly how to do what we're doing here. If it says not secure, it's probably because I didn't link to HTTPS, which I should have. I see that in the chat. So I believe the hosting service I'm using will automatically do that. So yeah, if you put HTTPS there, there is SSL certificates on this. I just should have linked that way in the slides. So I'll have to just go ahead and let me just go ahead and connect again because it's a different URL. But being that we're not really, I'm not really passing around any data in terms of HTTP data. It's encrypted. It's an encrypted transaction, so it's not really a big deal. So you're going to see this button here. It's going to say claim ticket. Now, what this is going to do when we click this button, we are calling into that mint function that I showed you before on GitHub. And it's minting a specific token with a specific token URI. So if I click this and say claim ticket, it's going to pop up a transaction. And it's going to say, hey, you want to make this transaction. And I'm just going to bump up the gas price here just to make sure it goes through in a timely fashion. I noticed Gorelli can be kind of slow at times. I'm not sure exactly why. So I just bump up that gas price, hit confirm. And now this is going to spin here, but what you could do is you can go into your wallet, look at the activity, and you can see that we have a mint call that is currently pending. So once this completes, hopefully it completes in a timely fashion. And this is also something that you can see on the network. Boom, there we go. Complete. Head over to testnets.opensea to see your ticket in your wallet. So if we go ahead and now click this, now that ticket is in my wallet. And if I go over to OpenSea, this is the LIBC community page from that contract. So this is the contract that's on the network. And you can see these tickets are now being minted. And these are automatically being picked up. I'm not submitting these to OpenSea. And if I go to my specific wallet here, go to my profile. I probably did this a bunch of times, but this is the ticket that I just minted. So there it is. And you can see the chain info. It's token ID number 10. Here's the contract address. And in the metadata, I have a little ticket here. And we could go ahead and say, all right, this is awesome. I want to go ahead and sell this bad boy, and we can sell it. It doesn't look like Gorelli is enabled for selling just yet. But so question in the chat, how much did that just cost you? This is costing us nothing, guys. This is all on the testnet. So that's what I'm saying. If you post your address, we're transferring ether to you. There's no real value here. So it's just getting us kind of using the technology. Okay, awesome. I see an address in the chat.
I got it.
You got it, cool. So
May need you to top me off later.
yeah, cool. I think I think we're pretty chock full of test ether right now. So any other questions there in terms of, I hope everyone engages with that and just plays around with that. I think that actual token will sit in your wallet forever now if you do this. And we could do things later on in our community, like, hey, if you were at the Create Your Token event back in 2021, we can read your wallet and see if that was the case, which is, I think, kind of cool.
By then we'll probably be on mainnet, so
Yeah.
we'll see what we do with it.
Yeah, Nick, this is Imran. Just a quick question. Maybe I'm stepping back a little bit, but is there a document or some link you can send us? Because I mean, we touched upon a lot of things here: a web page, a platform,
Yes.
a coding simulator, a few other things. Is there kind of a flow chart that I can follow, step 1, 2, 3 till the end, and at what point what I'm doing, which explains it, like a quick checklist? Is there any web page you can point me towards, or is there a document out there?
Yeah. So in terms of, and you're speaking, I know we're trying to cover a lot of different personas in terms of like non-developers and developers and things like that.
Yeah.
Are you speaking more in a development perspective?
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I'm very sorry. But the thing is, I mean, I just got introduced to something called blockchain in December. I did some online courses, just bombarded with my current work right now. So I haven't been able to go back. It requires a lot of time to fully absorb how to get started from what I understand. So I was trying to look for any kind of quick checklist, which can tell me, okay, so let's say for something for NFTs, you probably need a key. I mean, there's a private key. You need to build your program in this application, or you had something like hard hat. You need a web page for OpenSea, and then there is some other, that's a platform, right? Yeah, and a few other things. So how do I cover it? And like from A to Z till I post it, and like if we go to OpenSea, do we have to do kind of a KYC? I mean, how do they know that I am, who I'm saying I am? Do we need to do those kind of things? I mean, I'm basically not asking for that information. I'm just saying if you can point me towards that'd be really great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem. That's a good question. And I think to be honest with you, the top level, maybe somebody else has some resources here, but from a stepping back all the way, starting from installing a wallet to developing, say, an ERC 721 contract, I'm sure there are a bunch of tutorials out there, but I think you're probably going to have to piece together some of that a bit. Like, for example, what I have on my screen here is Open Zeppelin's ERC 721 page. And this is a page that I've used in the past to learn how to develop exactly what I just showed off in terms of creating your ERC 721 contract. But this isn't going to go back and say, hey, you need to have a wallet first, right? It's kind of assuming that at this point. So this would be a good resource. I think Open Zeppelin's contracts are
between this website, and I would go to the Ethereum website directly. I mean,
yeah, that is a good one.
Nick and I speak, typically only on the Ethereum protocol. There are a lot of protocols out there, but if you continue, and I hope you do continue to come to our events, we'll typically stay within the Ethereum ecosystem. Yeah,
this is a great resource. So starting right here, I think is probably from square one. This is probably a good place to start. Is read through these pages. The Ethereum 101, how to try it, different wallets. Yeah, they put out all these different types of wallets. We typically are using MetaMask when we're playing around with this stuff, but there are a slew of different wallets that you can use.
Okay, yeah,
still got to go play with Argent.
yeah, like these kind of like social recovery wallets are kind of cool now and stuff. So it's
thank you.
No problem.
I was going to say, that was a good question. Maybe in the future, give us a homework assignment. Say, listen, we're going to be talking about, if you want to brush up on it, maybe look at the Ethereum website, Open Zeppelin website, and if you can pick up any points and you'd be able to follow along a little better.
You got a deal. We'll start coming up with a bunch of quizzes that we can send out to our community. Because I'm serious. I know they say it like that, but like, it's a good fun way to engage with our community. Because typically, Nick and I have been running these for years, and typically it's just he and I prepping and then doing our little song and dance for you all.
Yeah.
Right. If I had known that, said, hey, listen, before you come on to this Zoom here or Meetup, you might want to take a look at, to brush up on, or to gain some more knowledge. Look at the Ethereum website, look at the Open Zeppelin website. It gives you a little information on NFTs, and But
Yeah.
now,
The
hearing and listening through this, I'm going to have to go back and look at those things now.
I mean, the one thing we could do too is that if you give us assignments, piece of it, because I think what a lot of us might struggle with is that, well, there might be a whole bunch of like how-tos, kind of like equivalent of like garage shop kind of how-tos. There doesn't tend to be these very accessible, considerations when setting up your wallet. Like things like that, where, obviously those of you who've been doing this for, years, you have your lessons learned, and, most of us don't have anywhere near that. So,
And that's why we try and make sure you don't have to have all our painful lessons.
Yeah. We got to share them.
Yeah, I think that's some great content that we can start working on. I think, we've given out our YouTube channel is a great place to start. I think Nick did an Ethereum dApp basics course that we're still clearly building on.
Yeah, we've got about 6
We'll make it more interactive.
Yeah. Yeah, and we start here, and with these series of lessons, I literally start with a blank text file. Like, I'm not assuming anything, and the application we're building isn't pretty, because I'm not going to get into CSS and all these other things that you would need to make it pretty. I'm focusing core on the blockchain stuff. So I think and we want to do some smart contracts, some more kind of, I'll call it back end stuff, but yeah, definitely looking forward to continuing to build with you guys. And I hope you're getting stuff out of this. I know we're trying to cover a lot of different things, and there's so much stuff to share that it's a little overwhelming at times. Like, what should we talk about, right?
Any requests for our next talk?
Yeah.
We'll come up with one.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll mention, and I don't know if anybody has read about this, or is the idea of DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations, and there in itself is a smart contract that you can put out, and then you can basically build communities within these DAOs, and we're seeing some of that emerge within NFTs, where there's these bidding processes going on, and guys with a ton of ETH are coming in and bidding on it. This just happened with a DAO called the Pleaser DAO, People Pleaser DAO. Somebody put out a smart contract and said, hey, I want to buy this artwork, but I don't have enough ETH to do it. Let's start a DAO, and let's pool our money together, and let's buy these assets or bid on these assets to try to outbid all the whales. And they successfully did it. They successfully.
Two really cool pieces that some of you that have followed the market may know about. So the first one, or even if you don't follow the market, so the first one was an animation video on the Uniswap V3 launch. So they did a really cool, animation for the Uniswap V3. They offered that up for charity, and the DAO was able to purchase that one. I don't know the ending sale price. And the other piece of artwork that Pleaser DAO purchased was the recent Edward Snowden item, which is interesting.
And these are actually in the foundation contract, and you can see how much they bought these for. Not a little bit of money. And this is from a pool of people that came together to buy these. And now the folks that are involved with this, they see themselves as kind of the first on-chain museum. They're curating artwork that they now collectively own. I think there's a slew of legal questions that come out of this. So we have all these different shareholders essentially in this contract that can lay claim to ownership to a ton of money here. So how does that actually work? And there's a lot to explore there.
So I think one thing that might be helpful is that if we can maybe have like two branches. One is there's like an investment nature to a lot of these things. And then another one is like there's applications. And I think sometimes they sort of get conjoined.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think for those of us that, you know, maybe haven't been trading in this in the last 4 years full time in our lives or whatever, you know, we wind up kind of getting hashed between the two and trying to sort of figure out when something is an applied solution versus when something is an investment or,
Mhm.
you know, a speculative, you know, whatever you want to call it, basically. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe even like maybe flip flop the meetups where we have more of a, this is an investment focused meetup this month or whatever time frame we're doing it. And then another month, maybe we have a developer focused event where we make it very clear that this is going to be technical or it's not going to be technical.
Yeah. Or even the investment one, I think, because I think most people, you know, in principle understand their objectives when they're trying to have investments or the basic ones. But the administration in this is, you know, a lot higher than setting up an E-Trade account or something like that, right? It's so there's just a different context that you have to, you know, like a barrier you have to cross, basically, that I think that trips most, or I think I'm speaking of myself, but I think it probably trips up more people than most realize.
Maybe a topic kind of on the investment front, we can talk about distributed like DEXs, distributed exchanges, and how we can get involved with tokens that aren't available on centralized exchanges. You know, and I think there's something there, right? And how to use Uniswap or something like that.
Right.
Sorry, I see Dr. Utsky's comment about DAOs garnering attention from the IRS and SEC. Did you happen to see that Wyoming is passing a law to recognize DAOs as their own unique entity? I don't know that that's what they'll actually be able to do, but they did pass a law to recognize DAOs as an entity. I don't, you know, not saying that that wouldn't attract the attention.
Very forward crypto state, Wyoming.
Long Island blockchain happens to be incorporated in Wyoming, just for reference.
That Edward Snowden for 5,410,000.
Yeah,
I'll just point out on that comment. This is David. I posted that. Yeah, so even though it's state law, federal law, oftentimes don't interact with each other. So even though the entity is recognized, doesn't mean that the federal government doesn't look at it as a partnership or corporation from a taxable event standpoint. And they will come back and get you for not filing tax returns, not registering the corporation, things like that. So.
Yes, understood. It's
makes sense.
There's a lot that we have to be wary of and always try and do right, I'll say. I don't know how.
Yeah, and that's an important point too for our community here on Long Island is like, you know, we don't want to the legalities of like, is this investment advice and things like that. I don't, you know, we don't want to get criticized for being like, invest in this and we gave people investment advice. It's not I
mean, I think that's why you could focus on the administrative side and we become clear of that, which is, you know, this is how you would administer an account, you know, very much like if you remember, or maybe your parents did, you used to have things like investment clubs or stock clubs.
Right. Yeah.
You know, would talk about the generic advantages or disadvantages of different investments, never made recommendations, but also focused a lot on administration, right? It was like, you know, that's sort of when you read about it in the 80s, that was how a lot of the no load funds became standard, is that people, it just sort of spread like wildfire. You know, it was like distributed human communication 1.0, you know, and people would just talk about, you know, these 50 funds are no load. or, you know, don't charge fees or low fees or whatever.
Mhm.
And a lot of that came through a lot of those clubs, you know, and I just think that could be beneficial too, just to have those kind of understanding, especially if those of you that have already, you know, gone down the deep end of this and come back out.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no coming out.
At least, you know.
It just keeps going.
Hey guys, I want to kind of piggyback off what Aaron just said. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in the DeFi route. And something that I was struggling with last night was I was trying to get a coin on PancakeSwap, but living in New York, it's hard to get Binance token.
I haven't played. It's hard to get Binance token. Doesn't Binance sell
doesn't
BNB on their
it
Binance
doesn't
US
support.
exchange?
No, not if you
Interesting.
live in New York.
Of course, New York.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
why,
that one makes it
why
hard.
is that? Is it because of the bit license technicalities with New York?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I'm not sure. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New York's one of the most heavily regulated states, and you cannot operate any type of what they call virtual currency, which is different than cryptocurrency. But you know, they obviously don't understand the two different technologies. But yeah, at the end of the day, you've got to have the bit license to operate in the state of New York. And
Yeah,
Binance.
The only two
Binance
that I
does
know
not.
of are that I could get access is Coinbase and Gemini at the moment.
So you
Yeah,
can
we don't have a talk on how to get around that. That's where Aaron will get us in trouble.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we just shouldn't want to get around these things. Like, you know, like we want to stay in the line. Like if we were all sitting here trying to run pizza businesses, we wouldn't be talking about how to get around things, right? Like,
right.
The stupid bucket. And you know, it's just how do we learn how to use these as either applications to solve problems, or how do we, you know, learn how to invest or how to administer our investments, and then use our best judgments and the best tools to figure that out. I mean, I think that's just sort of that argument on the maturity earlier, that I think we just got to get out of the sort of every time is a Las Vegas trip.
Right.
You know, I mean, maybe in 2013, that was the culture that made sense. But I think in 2021, if this stuff's going to really stick and become, to be blunt, normal, it just has to work like it's normal, right? It really does. It can't take 48 meetups to figure out how to do something.
No.
It's like, because like you could literally not know how to do something complicated in your house, like something hard plumbing wise, which is one of the things you probably should never do. But after 48 meetups, you probably could figure out that, right? And so it's like, this can't be harder than doing the hardest plumbing job or electrical job in your house.
Yeah.
They had a head start.
Well, I mean, that's the point, is you guys did that, right? Like you guys, and you didn't know you were doing that, but I think in the end, that's what you did. You know, I'm sure if someone asked you 5 years ago, hey, did you think it would take however many 1,000 hours to get to where you were or where you are? You probably wouldn't say like, no. And if you were given another choice, like, oh, you could have done that PhD your mom wanted you to do or whatever. And, you know, it's like, you probably could have done it. You know what I'm saying? Like there's an opportunity cost here.
Yeah, I can only speak to, well, I will only speak to ETH2. So when they launched ETH1, they already knew that they wanted to do ETH2. They wanted to get it off of the proof of work consensus mechanism. They wanted it on proof of stake.
I remember that. I remember
Ethereum launched in 2015. They truly believed that they would be on the Ethereum 2 proof of stake by 2017, 2018. Yeah. And obviously, and the way that they expected to deploy it with all of the sharding, I mean, that sharding technology is still 6 years, 7 years away from there.
So I'll be honest, that would be an amazing conversation on the maturity cycle, that if we could learn that from your perspective, that could teach us going forward how to recognize these sort of signposts.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the gaps here, is it's sort of like after a while when you do, you know, like if you do something, you kind of feel like some form of competency after a while. But what I found with a lot of this is that you think you know what you're doing
until you don't.
And then it's like you go back to kindergarten, and at a certain point, most normal people say, all right, well, this is something either way out of my zone, or this is something that's just not, ready for prime time, right? It's just, and I think the experienced people like you guys have that can help us maybe gain some of that insight. That's all I'm arguing.
Yeah.
I would be happy to go through a history of Ethereum and some of the, the EIPs and the standards and the evolution of it. I would be hopelessly useless on any other protocol.
Yeah. No, but that's huge, because then at least going forward, as Ethereum evolves, gains whatever regulatory status, as those things happen, we at least are like, okay, like we can draft behind that bike.
Yeah.
And instead of just like bouncing off the walls, trying to, not get hacked or not lose everything or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I mean, I said too much there, but I'm just, I just think that's a dimension that I think a lot of people run into.
Yeah, no, it's extremely helpful. And I think we should do more stuff like that for sure.
Talking about the topics that, if you want to discuss it, is there anything that we can touch upon how people do crowdfunding on blockchain?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. So, I mean, crowdfunding, I think, touches a little bit upon DAOs, right? In terms of
when you say DAO, it just goes over my head.
Yeah, so like the DAO is this idea of a distributed autonomous organization where it's a smart contract. Pretty much everything we're talking about resolves around smart contracts, and so it's basically a place on the blockchain where you can store value. You could do a crowdfund with just an account. I could post my address in the chat here and say I'm trying to raise funds for something, and put up a web page and say just send money to this and get people to send money. I'm sure people have done that, but I think there's more structured ways to do that where you can kind of get multiple parties' interests into a specific account. There's things like wallets, like multi-signature wallets, where you have multiple people have to sign a transaction before it can actually get sent and executed. All those things can enable ideas like crowdfunding, right? It could be as simple as just, hey, send me money. And it could be as complex as, hey, we have 200 people that need to approve this transaction in order to send value, or if they own the value it receives.
Maybe that's something you want to do for a project, because crowdfunding smart contracts, DApps are pretty easy to do, and Kickstarter and things like that are obviously some well-known ones out there. But to kind of show the functionality of the smart contract for crowdfunding and things like that might help. Picture worth 1,000 words kind of scenario. Yeah,
awesome. And that's kind of a goal we have too. Is we've done this now twice in terms of creating applications. We have the create your own token interface, which we developed from our ERC20. We now have our ERC721 interface, which we showed off with the create your own ticket, trying to create these really simple interfaces for you guys to see how we can kind of make it simple, right? Put a front end on top of it. So yeah, creating a crowdfunding interface would be pretty fun and probably pretty simple.
Guys, I have to run.
All right, Tom, thank you. Thanks for coming. All right, guys. So just a couple questions in the chat. I see. Oh, Craig's on it with the LIBC stuff. Nice. All right, so we're gonna probably we're approaching 10 o'clock. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation tonight. I hope you guys got something out of this and learned a little bit about what the what NFTs actually are, and still up in the air is whether or not they're valuable or not, right? That's up to us to decide. No one's going to be able to tell you, they're this is worth 69 million or not. A lot of times that's artwork, right? I remember growing up being like, how is a Picasso owned so much money? But it is.
$69 million for a Beeple JPEG.
Yeah, and you know what? You can't discount that. Dude, talking about opportunity cost, right? In terms of spending a lot of time doing something where you don't know if it's going to have a return. Yeah, he could have went and got a triple doctorate and whatever. but he spent every day for 13 years creating those pieces of artwork. Every day, did not miss a day.
And he was handsomely rewarded.
And he was handsomely rewarded. He may not have been handsomely rewarded. I don't think he realized that was going to happen when he was day whatever in, but every day for 13 years, he created a piece of
What's
artwork.
interesting is it's like the first mover advantage. So his first one is that, which if you averaged, let's say he did 8 hours a day, 13 years, that's like whatever.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to do that.
33,000 hours, let's say, or something. So then that's like $2,000 an hour. But then he didn't really get that much. He probably got half that with everyone else involved or whatever.
Yeah.
Law, taxes, this, that, and the other. So like
I can tell you, he for certain cashed it out immediately to US dollars for the big concern of, holy crap, what am I going to do with a tax bill on $69 million?
Yeah, exactly. But so it's like $1,000 an hour. I'll bet the next time it won't be anywhere near as many hours to do it. And it might be more per hour, but it'll be less of an amount, like that first mover advantage, because, people will not flood the market, but I'm sure people will.
Sure. Absolutely.
He got to, he got an opportunity that is once in a lifetime, no matter who you are. I mean, he launched, one of the first NFTs into a market that is flooded with accumulated wealth. You think about, people that have accumulated ETH and Bitcoin. And I mean, we know it's all in the mining facilities right now, but the mining facilities have tons and tons and tons of crypto. It needs to be distributed. And I, these efforts of $60 million of it just got distributed to people. And I'm okay with that, because it got it out of the mining facilities.
I mean, what'll be interesting is, and I mean, this is a longer term policy dimension, especially with Europe. I mean, Europe tends to be extremely aggressive with designing emissions models. So it'd be interesting to see how you get a sort of an energy, let's call it like an energy efficiency benefit, or a tax or a negation based on the degree of energy of clean energy, or some form of optimized energy driven mining. I mean, because that can change, especially if it's regulatory treatment, that could change a lot. If you think about,
the headlines are starting to come out. You see it with the NFTs, the question of the the environmental cost. 1 year from now, I expect that Ethereum will be off of proof of work entirely. They will not be furthering the economic waste or environmental waste. And I think the rest of the world, as we continue to stay on top of this, is going to start challenging things like Bitcoin, of like, well, if Ethereum can do it, what the hell are you doing burning down in a rainforest?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real challenge is China, right? Because you have so much hydroelectric engineering. There's 87, I think it is, 1,000 dams in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the largest environmental change in human history, is their implementation of, I think it's like 75,000 dams the last 40 years. They basically have redirected like half the water on the Tibetan plateau. And so that's sitting there, and
all to mine Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, no, but I mean, it's to create hydroelectric power and to use water as a strategic, point of leverage in the rest of South Asia. But it's interesting to see if, with different actors, how they sort of sit, because you could make a case. I mean, no one's going to make this yet. You could make a really interesting case for putting up a micronuclear reactor that just does this, right? I mean, I don't think someone's going to really do that, but I mean, you think about what it costs to do that. It's a few $1 billion. The regulatory hurdles might take, 5 to 10 years, but I mean, it's like fit for purpose, at the end of the day, and it's, you know, I'm not saying this is what people should do. I'm just pointing out.
Yeah. I mean,
Here to
the whole
educate.
consensus mechanisms, and maybe that should really be one of our next talks, because I see a couple of questions going off in the chat. I mean, the consensus mechanisms, they are so deep. The concept of doing proof of work, of literally just running a specialized computer to solve an an extremely difficult math problem solely so that you can basically timestamp these transactions, it's
Yeah.
wasteful.
Yeah,
I mean,
of
there's
course.
just no other way of looking at it.
Yeah. But if you compare that to the amount of energy and resources that are used by the centralized financial institutions around the globe, I've recently delved into researching and pulling data, and the complaints about the energy used. And yeah, proof of work is from 1993. Hashcash, which is the proof of work algorithm, created in 1997. I mean, you know, so I'm already dating myself as to how long I've been in this technology. But the point is, it's a fraction of what financial institutions use up. So, I mean, people complain about how much Bitcoin uses. Oh, you know, you could basically service a small city with the electricity that it takes to, you know, mine in Bitcoin. It's like, but you're forgetting, look at how much your bank uses just
But
in
is that,
servicing servers
Yeah,
and
but I think
building.
the difference is that we've evolved a financial architecture over 700-800 years. And that's sort of like saying we've created a pill-based form of nutrition. Look how, even though it takes a lot of energy to produce the one pill, look how efficient that is, without recognizing there might be 1 billion human beings involved in the agricultural and nutritional production as a species. And that dislocation is not sort of an academic seminar problem. It's a human sort of, it's a problem.
philosophy?
Yeah.
Just because it's comparable doesn't make it right? Like, just because it's so much a fraction of it doesn't mean it's not wasteful in theory.
Well, again, and you have to go back to the days of David Chaum, who basically were working off of a lot of the protocols that he designed today. Chaumian blind signatures and invisible payment systems are what were integrated in, because the government essentially attacked cryptocurrencies in the 90s.
Yep.
And developers went to work on how can we decentralize this, and so the government kind of keeps producing its own problem by attacking the system, but it was never meant to replace a governmental system. But again, why are we spending trillions on replacing the energy system that we have in place that is far more resource less intensive than creating grids around solar and wind that not only rely on renewable energy, but pretty extensively on the energy source that they're trying to get rid of? So, you know, again, augmenting a traditional financial system that is very antiquated with a more modern digital currency system that, yeah, it uses some energy too, but again, nowhere near as intensive as our current antiquated system that people like their intermediaries. And frankly, it wouldn't be nearly as intensive as what it is if intermediaries hadn't have been interjected into a decentralized intermediary free system. It was designed to be peer-to-peer, not with Coinbases and Geminis and Circles and everything else. So, you know, we've created a problem here that people are so used to their intermediaries that they've reintroduced intermediaries into what was designed to be a peer-to-peer system, and not have to lose your privacy.
So I guess I would argue intermediaries are not a bug, it's a feature. As human beings produce intermediaries in almost every dimension we have, and we can not like.
Doesn't make it right.
Okay, but that doesn't matter when 8 billion humans speak every day and they want to buy and do and send their kids and blah blah blah, and through, enormous layers of intermediaries, because we like the, ultimately, I believe a lot of it comes down to we create a tribal trust model around intermediaries.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, right? Because at the end of the day, your aunt, your mom, your dad, your cousin, your brother, your sister, whoever, has one of those jobs. If you're a nurse, the odds that someone else in the medical profession that's in your family goes up 50%, right? And it's just sort of a network effect. And so I think humans have created, it's a
Trust reliance.
Yeah, it's a powerful, scalable feature. If you're thinking of it in software terms.
Which has created our Amazons, our Googles, our Facebooks, and everything else who now own our data, as opposed to we now have a cell phone system based in distributed ledger where you own your data, unlike Parler that can be shut down by the giants like AWS, Amazon, and censor you and everything else. I'd much rather go with a trustless system than rely on the intermediaries that have taken control, because the internet was designed and introduced by Mr. Lee as a way to make information available to everyone. And yet that information is now being controlled by the people that control the internet. I guess I don't like that system.
I mean, I
gave it away.
I mean, my guess is, my view is, I think we sort of overestimate when we define something like control, right? When you take a control-based model, there's, when you look at it, whether it's legal or you look at it in social theory, the definition of control, tends to be fairly extreme. So when we use the word control, we should, I think, judge the behavior as maybe creating barriers is probably the more.
When you can shut down a social media platform because you don't agree with their policies around content, and they can turn you off, that's control.
If Coinbase didn't want to pay you out for your Bitcoin that you own, they could.
Yeah. And that's an intermediary control.
But in the end, we accept when we take our Hobbesian contracts, because we're state-based human beings. We in very few don't want to be state-based for all kinds of reasons. We accept the implementation of that sovereignty. Some try to negotiate that, and a handful can, but most accept sort of the model of the sovereignty that you get. And so if you're Canadian, there's a Canadian sovereignty, there's US, there's Mexican, there's Swiss, there's Nigerian, there's, Indonesian, 200 of them. So, that we're not going to disintermediate Hobbes. I mean, I think people have been trying to do that for 500-600 years, but that hasn't really worked.
No, we can offer new incentive models though.
Absolutely. And isn't that maybe the more elegant design?
That's what we believe in here.
And sort of feature wars, because I think, if you spend enough time in the technology industry, feature wars just give, they're great for customers. They get a whole bunch of features for nothing, basically, in the end. And you bankrupt however many firms involved in the feature.
All right, guys. We do see a lot of.
I'll leave that alone. I'd love to philosophically go down that path, but it's gotten late. I'm out here on the West Coast, so it doesn't affect me quite as much as you all.
Nice, cool. All right, guys. So yeah, I do see some folks dropping off here, and I just want to thank everyone for coming out. But yeah, no, but these conversations are really important, and it's super interesting to hear them. But I do want to say thank you to everyone that came out. And we look forward to doing more of these events going forward. I think, Aaron, I love that idea of splitting this up into more of investment focused and more tech focused. And if anybody here does want to host a talk, have a topic they want to talk about, maybe we do talk about some of these more philosophical and more kind of structural kind of human behavior concepts, which I think are really important. Yeah, if you guys want to talk, I did post a link to our Discord in the chat to kind of keep us all connected. And we look forward to continue to grow with you guys and learn about this stuff. And there's just so much exciting stuff happening that we just, want to keep our heads in it and keep moving forward. So thanks for coming out, guys.
We'll post the videos to our Meetup and our YouTube. Questions can go to either place, and we'll always reach out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is fantastic, guys.
Oh,
Thanks for joining us. Yeah.
Have a good
Good
evening.
night, everyone.
Everyone
Good
be
night,
safe.
guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.